These facilities, the Haber-Bosch reactor, it's a hydrogen bomb. It's a literal hydrogen bomb. Hydrogen gas and nitrogen gas reacting at 600 degrees Celsius and 200 atmospheres of pressure around the clock. It's a literal hydrogen bomb. And they're very expensive to turn off, and they're very vulnerable to missiles and drones. And a number of them have sustained damage. The pain of those facilities getting damaged, we will be feeling it in the next 6 to 12 months. Windom Shields, co-founder, CEO of General Ammonia Company, we've been working on an alternative for traditional ammonia production for about 6.5 years now, a little over 6.5 years. And essentially what has been motivating all this, my background is in economic analyses and forecasting for utility scale energy projects with RNG, liquefied natural gas, renewable natural gas, and especially utility scale wind and solar projects. And the mismatch that is ever present with wind and solar power between their geographic and especially temporal availability, when they're available during the day versus when and where commercial industrial energy users need them. That mismatch is really what motivated the formation of the company, is trying to find an economically viable means of storing and transporting intermittent and stranded renewable energy, renewable electrons, to be able to supply decarbonization without political support. We formed it in December of 2019, and originally we were just trying to find a way to bridge the intermittency of wind and solar power. We looked at concentrated solar power with molten salt batteries, building huge arrays in the middle of the desert with the tower in the middle to essentially liquefy salt and make ammonia using thermal power from the sun, a bunch of mirrors and all that. Very expensive and all these things. It theoretically could work, except the deserts don't have a lot of water, and the hydrogen and ammonia comes from water. So the mismatch between the availability of solar power in the desert and the requirement of water didn't work out. It wasn't making a lot of sense. With the geothermal, we kind of explored every possible option to make ammonia from these intermittent renewable energy resources. And then we eventually I started calling around to universities and research groups around the world to see who was working on electrocatalysis, using electricity directly to make ammonia in more ambient conditions. So not the high temperatures and pressures that are normally associated with ammonia production. And I ran into some papers that I couldn't even retrace my steps. The first question that the lead researcher asked me when I called him was, how did you find out we're working on this? We haven't published anything. I don't know. I found something online that said these guys' names and was some data about their work with a copper-based system. And I called them up, and they were really excited to hear from me. We went down to their facility at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and we saw firsthand a little 1 square centimeter copper cell that they had. And that was on Friday the 13th in March. I guess not technically the Ides of March, but close enough. It was the day everything shut down from COVID. It was the day we got to see the initial reactor. And so it's really good timing. We worked with them for the next month or two to get a sponsored research agreement in place and partnered with them to fund their research. My dad and I funneled our own money into supporting the research, paying for the salaries and all the materials and everything for the better part of 5 years, I guess, because we got our seed round. We closed with a group of investors last year to take it from where we had it, which was a few dozen milligrams per day and still 1 square centimeter, but a much more optimized, more efficient system. Different materials and all this. There were a number of iterations over those 5 years. And then we've taken it up to 2 by 800, working our way to 12 by 800 square centimeter system to make ammonia at around 1 to 2 or 3, depending on 2 factors, kilograms per day. So taking it from milligrams per day to kilograms per day. And that's where we're at 6.5 years later. Yep. So definitely believe in the opportunity for this, even just to supply fertilizers. I think it's going to be much more applicable to fuel markets, dispatchable utility power generation, all these things. But even just the potential to decarbonize fertilizer is huge. So I definitely believe in the potential impact of a technology like this. It's definitely come into the spotlight. Most conversations in the past several years have been people's responses, oh, ammonia? I think I've heard of that before. And now everybody knows ammonia. Oh, that's a pretty important chemical, right? We use that all over the place for food, right? It's essentially a little over half of the world's supply of fertilizer is now in a war zone between Ukraine, Russia, and now in the Middle East. A lot of those facilities have already suffered damage or have been shut down, into measures, shut them down early in case they get hit, and then be even worse if they were still running. Because these facilities, for context, is the Haber-Bosch reactor is operating around the clock. They basically only shut it down for a couple days a year, regular maintenance. Otherwise, it's running 24/7. And it's a hydrogen bomb. It's a literal hydrogen bomb. You've got hydrogen gas and nitrogen gas reacting at 600 degrees Celsius and 200 atmospheres of pressure around the clock. It's a literal hydrogen bomb, and they're very expensive to turn off. They're very expensive to build in the first place, and it takes a long time to turn them back on when they stop. And there's all sorts of expenses and dangers associated with everything about them. And they're very vulnerable to missiles and drones. And a number of them have sustained damage in the last few months and in few years with Russia and Ukraine. And that damage is long lasting. It takes a while. There's a lag time between the unavailability of fertilizer and crops getting more expensive and food products down the line getting more expensive. But ammonia is kind of the foundation for most agriculture. There's only a couple products that don't need nitrogen-based fertilizers, soybeans, etc. But almost everything else does. And so the pain of those facilities getting damaged and brought offline and that amount of supply going offline is not yet felt. We will be feeling it in the next 6 to 12 months, but it's going to make things expensive for sure. India gets a lot of their fertilizer. I forget the percentage, but it's most of the fertilizer for all of India comes through the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe it's like 80% or so. And fertilizer prices are going through the roof because that production's come offline. So I've been at some conferences recently and people were asking, well, if prices are just too expensive, what's the alternative? What do people buy instead? And the presenter at the time was like, what do you buy instead of ammonia? I don't understand the question. With the reason being, well, if I don't have any water in the desert, what do I drink instead? Well, you're kind of SOL because there isn't an alternative for water. There isn't an alternative for ammonia. If you don't have ammonia, you don't fertilize your crop yields go down, and you've got less food that's more expensive to go around feeding the same number of people. Even here in the U.S., we're not immune to it by any means. We get most of our supply. We've got some level of domestic production, but we're definitely a net importer of ammonia. We bring most of it in from Trinidad and Tobago, of all places. They're one of the world's largest suppliers, something like 20% of the world's ammonia made in Trinidad and Tobago. Huge suppliers of ammonia, and they send most of it. Most of our supply comes from them. It goes into a pipeline in Donaldsonville, just north of New Orleans, and gets distributed up through the Great Plains in a big pipeline. World's largest ammonia pipeline, currently in operation. Been operating since the 60s. The ramifications of a technology, what we've been developing, are huge, both in scale and scope. So essentially, how we compare to the existing technology. Haber-Bosch, like I said, big hydrogen bomb you got to build. It's essentially the size of a small city, each individual plant. These things are huge. And they take a ton of energy running around the clock, etc. What we have instead are these modular units. They, at the commercial industrial scale, they'll probably be each about the size of a shipping container, standard shipping container. Makes them super easy to standardize manufacturing and distribution logistics. And they're kind of all the same over and over and over again. So you can just stack these things up in a big tower and a series of towers, and you cut the footprint down by a huge amount and simplify the whole process from an engineering perspective. That you just really are connecting a series of the same things over and over again, rather than building a whole city from scratch, custom made to whoever the contracted off-takers are for that facility. So it really streamlines and simplifies the development process, which should add to the cost savings down the line. And to the point of energy security and security of supply, just generally, for both fuel and fertilizer, that's a huge selling point of this, especially more so recently with these developments. But resource-constrained economies around the world, all of Africa, basically, Japan, even India and China, these areas that don't have access to the same natural gas and oil products, petro products, that other economies like the US and even Europe do, will really benefit from this technology. You won't have to import ammonia up the plateau into Africa. You can just make it in each individual village across the whole continent. You can put up some solar panels, maybe some wind turbines, depending on the resource, and make their own fuel and fertilizer completely locally. They won't have to be relying on these international supply chains. Japan has a ton of wind resource in the far north of the country. They don't have any turbines up there because all the people live in the south part of the country. And so there's this mismatch there that Japan doesn't have to be an energy importing country if they could liquefy these abundant wind resources in the far north of the country. And it just holds true all around the world that you can drop this in where there are either logistics bottlenecks or an overabundance, a supersaturation of renewable energy, and completely isolate the supply chain from global influence. just the nature of the chemistry. Nitrogen, 78% of our atmosphere. Every breath you take, 3/4 of the molecules going in are nitrogen gas, inert. It's inert because it's so stable. It's a triple bonded molecule. It's very hard to break the nitrogen bond to make it available for reaction with hydrogen. And then hydrogen, it's one of the most volatile molecules in existence, incredibly lightweight, teeny tiny. It breaks through steel and embrittles it. It's got all these issues with storage and transportation. You want to use hydrogen as soon as it's made. You don't want to have any more hydrogen on hand than you have to for whatever process, petrocracking, ammonia production, whatever it is. You want to minimize the time between production of hydrogen and its use. And so the nature of the chemistry of the two molecules necessitates this brute force concentrated, what's the word I'm looking for? The opposite of distributed. What you want to have these centralized production. So you build it essentially right on top of fossil resources where the natural gas is cheapest. So in the Middle East, that makes it easy. It's a smelly chemical and it got its own host of safety issues, like every other energy-containing molecule. You don't want to generally do it right next to population centers, at least not in the industrial quantities that these facilities kind of economic operation. So the Middle East is perfect for that. Tons of natural gas, and all that many people outside of the urban centers. So you can plop these ammonia production facilities right on top of a gas well and utilize natural gas that was otherwise just being flared and all these things to production where the resource is most abundant. And the reason we can't do that too, we aren't ubiquitous. Solar resources aren't ubiquitous. We can centralize our production too, but it's a lot easier to distribute our production as well. That a homestead anywhere in the world could have a shipping container dropped off, and voila, they've got their own fuel and fertilizer production. Compared to building a Haber-Bosch reactor, and anybody's homestead is probably not going to happen. Yeah. So we've got instead of this temperature and pressure to force brick wall of the stability and make this reaction happen. Essentially, we've used a metal mediator, calcium. We're in the public domain. We use a calcium mediator to essentially walk right through it. There's a door that just nobody had the key for. And so instead of trying to break through the brick wall to make the available for reaction, we got an unlocked door and we can just walk right through. It's an incredibly efficient reaction. The requirement is less than half of that of Haber-Bosch with this intermediary. And essentially between the calcium nitride that's formed and hydrogen ions is more or less spontaneous. That when we have the nitrides deposited on the surface of our catalyst, the reaction just does its thing. It makes it an incredibly efficient thing. And as part of our process, we don't use hydrogen gas. We don't need an electrolyzer and all the hydrogen storage and everything that goes with it. We use water directly. We have a proton shuttle, that hydrogen ions H+, not H, and available for reaction with the nitrogen. So it's an incredibly efficient process. With the production out the other side is pure anhydrous ammonia. It's commercial industrial grade ammonia out the other side. So same exact chemical as the previous process. And I get asked a lot, how did you guys discover this? Why hasn't anybody been doing this in the last 110 years of ammonia production? And the answer is pretty simple: is coal and natural gas were cheap and they worked. The market was pretty established. It made ammonia at a cost that was palatable to primary uses. 85% or so goes to agriculture, but there's also explosives for mining and, of course, munitions, and et cetera, textiles manufacturing and other chemicals. But primarily it's used for agriculture and fertilizer. And it was cheap enough. Coal and natural gas made ammonia at a price point that worked for everybody, and there wasn't really any economic incentive to innovate this beyond just optimizing the conditions for traditional Haber-Bosch. So it's a combination of there wasn't an economic impetus to improve it, and then that everyone else, people have been working on this, but they were asking the wrong questions. The question of yesteryear that motivated how to make ammonia was, well, we got all this coal, we got all this natural gas, we've got all this energy in this form. How do we make ammonia from it? And great question. We solved it. It was perfect. We've optimized it over 110 years. Sweet. Wind and solar are a fundamentally different resource, and they require a fundamentally different question to be able to use them for this process. They're cheap, they're abundant, but they're not everywhere. They're not ubiquitous. They're not everywhere, and they're not every when, like natural gas or coal can be. And so the ability to use them for ammonia production has to take a different approach. And so the efficiency has been the primary motivator for all of our electrochemical competition. They've been striving for, we need to get as close to that 100% efficiency, 100% selectivity as possible. And we said that doesn't matter. Wind and solar are cheap resources. It doesn't matter if 50% efficient, 60% versus 80, 90, 100%. There's not really a functional difference because the cost of that energy is so cheap. What's really important is the cost of development. It has to be a low enough cost of development and a quick enough response time from the operation that you can just turn it on when there's wind and solar available and turn it off and wait for them when they're not. And that's the approach that we've taken. And the levelized cost of ammonia that we see out the other side reflects that. Yeah, the whole motivation for us is to be able to utilize these stranded renewable energy hotspots, which doesn't work when the cost of development is so high that we can't even get off takers on the other side. Lithium mediated is the top competitor to us around the world, and lithium suffers from a number of operational issues, but not least of which is it's a lot more expensive than calcium. And so the levelized cost of ammonia out of a lithium plant is well over $1,000 a ton, even at reasonable feedstock electricity prices. And just nobody's going to buy at that price. Curtailment is a real issue. The market for renewable energy quickly gets saturated at just a small market penetration for wind or solar. California sees this with their duck curve. They generate enough solar that the grid can't handle it. There's too much electricity on midday compared to who's using it. And the same thing with wind turbines and corresponding electric prices through the Great Plains. There's no new wind turbines really getting erected anywhere from Minnesota to Texas. It's really got nothing to do with the current administration. The market is saturated with wind. Not that many people live in the Great Plains, and the grid reflects that. And every time the wind blows, power prices are negative. It's something around 20% of hours in the year, power prices are at or below $0 free. And when that happens, people put the brakes on their turbines. You ever drive down the interstate through Nebraska or Kansas or Colorado on a windy day, and you look out and none of the turbines are spinning? It's curtailment right there. There's too much power relative to the grid and what it can transport, who's using it. It's too much power. And that's a big problem. There's plenty of wind still to harvest in there and at good prices, but there's no one there to use it. We want to change that. Sits right on top of the world's largest ammonia pipeline. Easy way to supply the world. It's really not a problem of energy abundance. It's not that we don't have enough energy. It's that the energy is available in a form that we can't use. It's intermittent. It's non-dispatchable. And so with our process, we can upgrade those non-dispatchable electrons to a form that can be used anywhere and any when. Fertilizer be easy peasy, plug and play. It's the exact same molecule at a stable price. It's clean, so there's no concerns for traditional environmental decarbonization kind of thing. So it's easy enough. It's a matter of scale for fertilizers. Traditional ammonia markets are around 200, 250 million tons per year. We're a few kilograms per day. So it's going to take port press from not just us, but a network of partners around the world, building as fast as we can, as much as we can, as immediately as we can to get demand. Once we start factoring in replacing fuel oil for shipping and power generation, NAS like Japan, for example, is already demonstrating fired gas turbines, just like our natural gas turbines that we use at the utility scale, hundreds of megawatts kind of thing. They've got the exact same thing, but it's fired with ammonia instead of natural gas. Japan's full in. They totally recognize, they're convicted of the utility of ammonia as a renewable energy resource. Their push for ammonia utilization technologies reflects that. But once you start factoring in its value as an energy commodity, as a fuel, you quickly get into the tens of billions of tons per year that are needed. And it's a huge problem. A huge market. It's well beyond anything that my company could ever hope to do. It's going to take a network of very savvy and large partners around the world all working together immediately as possible. The first dual fuel co-firing with ammonia vessels are hitting the water, I believe, later this year or early next year. And there's a lot of ships being built with the dual fuel capacity. Orders have been placed for pure ammonia capacity, but those are set for delivery closer to 2030 on account of there's no available ammonia supply right now. The market is tight. It's mature. There's not really any wiggle room for additional contracts, especially not now. The market's way beyond tight right now with close to half of global supply more or less offline for the time being and foreseeable future. So it's really waiting in the wings. It's ready to go, but it needs a new supply, and preferably one that's not coming from fossil fuels and doesn't cost billions of dollars per project to develop. The capital cost reduction is a key part of this to enable widespread use, especially in more developing economies. Oh, and the applications of this with nuclear powered vessels is through the roof. Like a U.S. aircraft carrier, for example, a nuclear powered carrier could be constantly producing its own fuel, its own munitions, explosives come from ammonia too. The ability for islanding strategic military assets and such from this is enormous. They can completely self-sufficient. You can even use ammonia that you're making to make your own food on base if you need that kind of resilience from your supply chain. You can grow your own crops, vertical farming or whatever on a military base with your own fertilizer made. It's the same fuel that goes into your trucks and everything else and powers the base and makes the munitions. The potential implications of commercial success with technology like this are just broad, and the scale and scope of the impact is huge. Potential impact. We're not there yet. Potential impact. We essentially have the, you can think of almost like a big battery, but instead of electricity coming out the other side, it's liquid fuel. It's ammonia. But it's the same kind of deal as individual cells like that stacked up in a big tower. And we're the technology owner. We won't be doing the actual manufacturing. We're not a manufacturer, but be more like the KBRs of or Topso or ThyssenKrupp, the guys who own the technology and essentially license it out to project developers. At $70 a megawatt hour, we've modeled out that our current efficiencies put us around $400 per ton in production price, which traditional ammonia markets were anywhere from $200 to $600 a ton. So we're smack in the middle of where ammonia prices ought to be at a reasonable cost of electricity. We drop that price of electricity, the corresponding cost of ammonia drops with it. But if we assume some benefits of economies of scale with our manufacturing processes and some minor efficiency improvements while we scale up, we can easily hit $200 per ton or less on the commercial industrial deployment. And for cost comparison's sake, that's around $1 per gallon of gasoline equivalent. So it becomes a very low price energy commodity on the way to decarbonization. So we'd be well under less than half the cost of standard bunker fuel or even stationary coal power. The wind and solar really introduce a lot of grid instability. They're very cheap comparatively, very cheap to build and operate from the wind and solar developer's perspective, or from a grid operator's perspective. Wind and solar, terrible resources. They're so expensive to plan your grid resources around because when peak generation comes, they saturate the grid to the point of you have to turn off the power. You got to turn off the panels, you got to curtail the wind. They saturate the available resources very quickly with minimal market penetration. But at the same time, cloud can come over and you've just lost half of your solar generation within minutes. And you've got to ramp up your natural gas peaker plants to accommodate that. And natural gas peaker plants, it's expensive to plan your resources around these intermittent sources of power that can change so quickly. So they're very expensive from a grid operator's perspective, which would be huge value to us. We could streamline the development process of wind and solar by putting them behind the meter, so you don't have to go through the grid operator and deal with all the interconnection queues. We can handle all that instability off the grid, and at the same time could set up ammonia turbines or co-firing with coal plants, a number of ways to get power from ammonia and put it on the grid and instead become a dispatchable resource for the grid.